it's a huge diplomatic mistake to start any negotiations with such statements, because, we should always keep in mind that we are talking not about conflict between one country and versus another country. We're talking about serious, grave international crime, a crime of aggression.
President Trump will be meeting Vladimir Putin on Friday. He's just been speaking to the press about the conflict in Ukraine. He's repeated his claim that the war would not have happened if he had been in power in 2022.
If you look, under President Bush, they took a lot of territory. Under President Obama, they took a lot of territory. Under Biden, they essentially took the whole thing. It's just a question of time. Under Trump, you know what they took? Nothing.
Well, President Trump's ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, has suggested that Russia has earned some of the territory it currently occupies. Trump responded to questions about what role there is in this next chapter for President Zelensky of Ukraine.
I was a little bothered by the fact that Zelensky was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap, because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad.
And here's the president on what could come out of Friday's summit.
But it's very complex, because you have lines that are very uneven, and there'll be some swapping, there'll be some changes in land, and the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine. But they've taken some very prime territory. They've taken largely ocean, in real estate we call it oceanfront property. That's always the most valuable property. If you're in a lake, a river, or an ocean, it's always the best property.
Well, let's speak to Oleksandr Merezkho, chair of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. Oleksandr, good to speak to you. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you for inviting me.
Right, let's get some reaction from you to what President Trump has been saying ahead of the Alaska summit. First of all, Trump says he is going to tell Putin he has to end this war. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, President Trump could have done it long ago. I would like to remind the basic fact that the war was continuing while Trump was the president. So he could have stopped that war long ago if he had enough political will. Unfortunately, he didn't do it. He also behaved in a sort of inconsistent way, which undermined his credibility, because he had come up with at least 5 times with ceasefire proposals, and he promised to apply to implement sanctions against Putin if he disagrees, if he rejects these peace proposals, ceasefire proposals, which happened. Putin had rejected, and unfortunately, President Trump didn't follow through on his promise.
Okay, so you wish he'd done that sooner, right? What else have we got? He suggested that there will be land swapping going on. He said there will be good and bad stuff for both Ukraine and Russia. That's what the president said.
Well, first of all, it's a huge diplomatic mistake to start any negotiations with such statements, because, we should always keep in mind that we are talking not about conflict between one country and versus another country. We're talking about serious, grave international crime, a crime of aggression. And there is a perpetrator, Russia, and there is victim of the aggression. And there is international law, principles of territorial integrity, non-use of force, and the UN Charter. And proceeding from that, it's a moral and I would say political and even legal obligation of any decent country, democratic country, to help the victim of the aggression. Because territorial swaps, I cannot imagine, for example, President Trump agreeing to territorial swaps if tomorrow Putin will include Alaska into his constitution and will start nuclear saber-rattling. I cannot imagine Trump doing this. So why would he demand from Ukraine to do something which is absolutely out of question from the perspective of our constitution, which is legally, politically impossible, and which goes against the whole system of global security and international law?
In terms of Trump saying he will try to get some territory back for Ukraine, do you think he will be successful?
Well, it's very easy to solve the issue, to make Putin to withdraw his troops from the whole territory of Ukraine, internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. How to do it? Very simple. We need political will from President Trump. We should stop Russian war machine. How we can do it? By denying Russia oil and gas revenues. This can be done by imposing serious secondary sanctions on those countries which provide lifeline to Russian war machine by buying Russian oil and gas. It can be done by the United States and Europe. And another venue, another approach is to provide Ukraine with all necessary weaponry, which would allow us to defeat Russian troops on Ukrainian soil. It can be done. It's a problem of the lack of political will, unfortunately.
What do you make of how we've got to this point, Oleksandr? I know we spoke last week around Steve Witkoff's visit to Moscow. This seems now to be the direct result of that. What should the Trump administration be considering about how it is approaching this particular period of negotiation and ideally, hopefully, progress towards peace?
Well, it's important not to undermine the unity of the West facing Putin's aggression, because it's a security issue not only for Europe, but also for the United States. What we need and what Putin is afraid of most of all is unity. Transatlantic unity, unity between the United States and European countries, European Union, and we need also unity within the European Union and the whole Europe, including, of course, one of the leaders of support of Ukraine, for which we are grateful, the United Kingdom. Having this unity, we need to come up with consolidated peace plan supported by credible deterrence on the part of the West. It can be done. Again, the key issue, the key problem is the lack of the necessary political will.
Overall, then, Oleksandr, what would you say about Trump's approach to the Alaska summit? And I should note as well with you that Trump suggests the next meeting will be between Putin and Zelensky, and Trump will help organise that. That feels like rapid progress if all of these things are to happen and fall into place.
Well, I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt to President Trump, and I still hope that the things are not the way they look on the surface. I hope that he might have some kind of sophisticated strategy dealing with Russia. But so far, looking at the first glance, looking at the surface, it's really disturbing to see the rerun of Munich 1938, when the fate of the victim of the aggression is being decided by great powers at the expense of the victim of the aggression. And the aggressor is rewarded, not punished with a territorial concession. It might be a huge blunder.
It might be a huge blunder. Oleksandr, thank you very much. Thank you for speaking to us. Oleksandr Merezkho is chair of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. I mean, somewhere in all of this, isn't there, is a reminder that borders are not set in stone in the eyes of some, and land indeed can be something that is tradable, that is up for grabs when it comes to diplomacy and statecraft. Let's get a different perspective on all of this, perhaps from Andrei Kozyrev, former Russian foreign minister. Andrei, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for speaking with us. So this meeting in Alaska on Friday, President Trump says he believes that Putin wants the war to be over, and Trump says he will tell Putin that it is time for the war to end, that he has to end this war. Will Putin be listening to Trump on Friday?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with everything what the previous speaker said, Oleksandr. And the prospects at this point are very meager, and I think President Trump began to understand. He was definitely, in my mind, just misled by Mr. Witkoff, who in his turn was misled by Putin. To talk to Putin is an art in itself. You know, we who grew up, and I worked in the Soviet Union as a diplomat, we understand it naturally. And of course, you have to understand the Russian language in details, in nuances, not just rough interpretation, Putin is using a double speak. You know, it's like in Orwell's book, 1984. Big Brother used a special speak. That's what Putin does, and that's why I'm not optimistic about the meeting in Alaska, because I don't know and I don't see that there is anyone near to President Trump who could help him to decipher, so to say, the Putin speak. You know, I'll just give you one example, but very telling example. In Russian language, the word mir means both the peace and the world. So basically, when Putin says, I want a peace, that might be that he means, I want the world, at least so-called Russian world. And Russian world, by his definition, is every territory which ever belonged to Russia, or as he says, Russian boots, that is military boots, stepped on this land. And by the way, Alaska is exactly that kind of land. It absolutely fits in description. And actually, Russian boots were there, and then they once massacred the indigenous population, even in Alaska. Yeah. So the whole thing looks not particularly promising to my mind.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear what you say there about the language and perhaps the inability of Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's special envoy, to pick that up and pick up the nuance and convey that back to the White House as well. When President Trump says there will be land swapping going on, and he says there will be good and bad stuff for both Ukraine and Russia, what would be bad for Russia in that context? Land swapping seems to be exactly what Putin's ambition has been since the all-out invasion, and indeed before that as well, but since his invasions of Ukraine. It's difficult to see what's bad for Russia in that context.
No, for Russia is bad, the whole thing. The war is suicidal in the long run to Russia. But in the short run, as of today, a so-called land or territorial swaps, it means that they try to play with the occupied land only. The swaps between Ukraine and Russia would be like a Russian territory, I say, Kursk or Belgorod Oblast in Russia proper, behind the internationally recognized border. But they are all talking, and that's one of the games Putin plays, and that probably Mr. Witkoff missed, lost in translation, that he is speaking of jangling. It's not even swapping, it's like jangling the territory which he occupied by force, in a violation of international law, in violation of his own signature under the treaty which he signed in 2003, I mean Putin signed, on delimitation of the border. So he recognized officially, and it was ratified on both sides. And there was a agreement, international agreement, signed on the top level by the President of the United States, the President of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and President of Russia at that time in '94, which I actually co-authored with the American Secretary of State of that time, Warren Christopher, in Budapest. And that speaks of assurance of those countries for the Ukrainian territorial integrity, a territory which demarked by Putin later and which is on every internationally recognized map. So the swap is totally misleading, even for language.
Okay. Andrew, it's fascinating to get your perspective. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's Andrei Kozyrev, Foreign Minister of Russia from 1990 to 1996, basically saying that Witkoff and Trump are being played by Trump. Witkoff and Trump are being played by Putin. When Putin says he wants peace, he could mean he wants the world. That could be as simple as a translation error. Gosh, there's a thought.